With all the focus right now on the Russia-Ukraine border, you barely hear about the U.S.-Mexico border. But rest assured, the cartels haven't shifted their attention. They are running massive human trafficking operations into this country. Human trafficking, as defined by the Department of Homeland Security, involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to press victims into some kind of labor or commercial sex work. It's a global scourge, generating roughly $160 billion in annual profits. And in the U.S., it's abetted by lax policies at the border, as we hear from our first guest. Joining us now is Rodney Scott, retired Chief of U.S. Border Patrol. He served from January 2020 through the first 7 months of the Biden administration, capping off a 30-year career at the border. Chief Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on today. Really appreciate it.
So let's jump right in. How big is the problem of human trafficking at the southern border that includes labor trafficking, sex trafficking? What does it look like on the ground?
It's a huge problem. It's hard to put numbers on it just because it is so elusive and it is such a big threat. But the more that there's just chaos at the border, the more that provides cover for human traffickers. And what's going on today on the southwest border is nothing short of chaos. So there's a lot sneaking by.
So can you elaborate a bit on that chaos and how things are more chaotic now than maybe they had been?
Sure. So during my 30-year career, if you will, we've systematically been improving border security using barriers, personnel technology, and policy to try to get control of the southwest border. And what we mean by that is just make sure everybody comes through our front door, the ports of entry, and they're not sneaking through in between the ports of entry. So there's been ebbs and flows. But the last administration, the focus on the border wall, focus on a lot of policies, closing loopholes in the asylum process, those were all reversed on January 20th. So when those policies were changed, the border wall construction was shut down, we saw an influx of illegal immigration into this country that we really have never seen before. What that equated to last year, about 1.9 million illegal aliens came to the border, were encountered by CBP. I think like 1.6 million were between the ports of entry by Border Patrol. That just overwhelms the resources. For example, last week, I believe, or maybe this last Tuesday, there were over 5,000 illegal aliens apprehended on the southwest border in between the ports of entry by Border Patrol. That overwhelms their resources, and then what that means is Border Patrol agents are busy, and that leaves huge gaps in border security. The cartels have figured out how to leverage that, and then they bring in the narcotics, the criminal aliens, or people that are being trafficked, if you will, people that don't want encountering law enforcement. They bring them through those huge gaps, and that's a huge threat, and it's getting worse every day.
So what percentage of the border is actually controlled by the cartels? Do you have to use a smuggler if you want to get across?
Yeah, I really believe that you do. I'm sure there are still some people that sneak up to the border and get across. But the cartels control every part of the southwest border specifically. They have all the way down to what they call plaza bosses, which are individuals responsible for certain geographic areas. And anything that crosses through that area has to pay a fee or use a smuggler. You can try to sneak through those areas, but you're really trying to putting your life at risk, even more so than normal when you try to cross without a smuggler. San Diego, for example, a few years back, we had a very systematic process put in place to do interviews and try to put some metrics and some evidence behind these claims, if you will. And in a very short amount of time, we were able to document about 65 to 70% of the illegal alien traffic coming across and tie it back to specific smuggling organizations that were directly related to the cartel. And that was with only a minimal effort.
And that's not the case now because the numbers are overwhelming that system?
A lot of times the victims don't know they're being trafficked yet. So you actually have to have a conversation, an interview, if you will, face to face with these people to start picking up some clues, or to even find out who the smugglers were that brought them across. And then based on history, we would know that that was an organization that was involved in human trafficking. But when there's making 5,000 arrests a day, the agents don't have time to sit down and do those deep dive interviews. They're barely treading water just to do the bare minimum processing of individuals and then push them to the next phase of the immigration process or the prosecution process. This is really, really a challenge with children right now as well.
Just to give some of those numbers, in fiscal year 2021, there were nearly 123,000 under 18-year-olds were referred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. The year before, that was less than 15,400. And the vast majority of those are older teens. It's not little kids. There was 72% were 15 to 17-year-olds. And not only that, this I found interesting, 80% were from Honduras and Guatemala. Only 1% were from Mexico. So who are these teenagers and why are there so many from Guatemala and Honduras?
They really do run the full gamut of someone that you've probably seen the pictures of, the children that are dropped across in remote areas that are being reunited with family, or teenagers that look like they could be a kid from down the street. But it's also a lot of gang members from these southern, from Guatemala, Honduras. And the reason that you see the numbers disproportionately from the Northern Triangle is we can still actually very quickly repatriate Mexican minors back to Mexico. And that's still going on today. So there really isn't the draw. But when this administration made a decision that any minor from a country other than Mexico was not going to be deported, that message went out globally, and we saw a massive influx of minors.
Let's build the picture. What happens? You said a lot of people don't even know that they're about to be or have been a victim of trafficking. So describe a little what happens to that person.
So in their mind, they in most cases anyways, they believe that they're coming to the United States for, and you can fill in the blank, a better life, a job, reunite with family or whatever. But because the cartel owns the border and you need to use a smuggler to cross that border, they've now introduced themselves to this criminal element that they don't really fully understand in many cases. They've also had to pay some significant fees. That fee is ranging anywhere from $4,000 to about $10,000 to cross the southwest border for someone from the Western Hemisphere, Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador. They don't have that kind of money usually, so they get part of the money up front. A lot of them make commitments to pay off the money once they're here. And just think of the loan shark type concept where they're layering on interest and fees on top of that. And then the individual finds themselves in a forced labor situation or sex slavery type situation after they get to the final destination. But when Border Patrol encounters them at the border, they don't really know how much risk they're at yet. So it's really hard to pick up on, even in the interviews, it's hard to pick up any kind of a signal that would let you know that they were being trafficked because they don't know it. So we have to focus on the organizations where we've identified connections and a nexus to trafficking in the past. And then again, a lot of the final end of it, the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, the victims advocacy groups, a lot of times they're the ones that find out the end state that they were ultimately subject to trafficking. And hopefully they're willing to go to law enforcement.
And how successful have you been at that?
So there's a lot of room there for improvement. So with DHS being formed back in the early 2000s, and then focusing really on connecting some of the databases and making investigative agencies work together with the nexus then being terrorism, it really has helped even in the human trafficking realm. But a lot of the non-governmental organizations, the advocacy groups, they see law enforcement as a threat, and they don't understand how much we can help. They're focused on the individual and as opposed to the big systematic cartel violence and trafficking that's going on. And I argue that you really need to get that information back into the system so that we can protect thousands and thousands of people, not just the one individual. There's a lot of laws on the books now that protect the victim if they're willing to testify against these organizations.
So who are you actually going after?
So the smuggling networks and the cartels in general are very sophisticated and very compartmentalized, and they're getting more and more compartmentalized to protect themselves, if you will. So it's multiple stages. The smuggler or the coordinator in the host country or the home country, if you will, does not stay with the aliens or the migrants as they come up through Mexico to the southwest border. There's many, many handoffs. And the same thing usually happens in the United States. So when I mentioned earlier, the plaza bosses, the individuals that control the border, they have guides that we refer to them that work directly for them that actually bring the migrants across, or the drug smugglers, or in this case, people that are going to be trafficked. They bring them across, and then they will get them to like the next point, which is usually fairly close to the border, and then hand them off to a transportation cell of the same organization. And then usually that transportation cell just gets them from point A to point B, maybe from San Diego to Los Angeles or McAllen up to Houston, and they'll be handed off again. There's multiple layers in the process.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Chief Scott, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Be sure to watch the entire episode, now available at EpochTV.com, a new completely censorship-free premium subscription platform. Brought to you by the Epoch Times. See you there.